Why is SailGP sprint leg so dangerous? If you're new to this sport, I'm going to explain exactly why, and this will also shine a light on how these boats are powered, which may open your eyes up to the wider sport. If you do know a lot about sailing, then I think in this video I'm going to break down one of the biggest misconceptions about apparent wind sailing. Now, all of this, there is a big elephant in the room. SailGP's sprint leg is actually just sailing at 90 degrees to the wind. And weirdly, this is exactly how we introduce complete beginners to the sport. So it's pretty strange that our top athletes are struggling so much with this task. I'm going to explain a bit of the physics behind why it's so hard, and this can be broken down into three areas. So we've got what's going on in the air, what's going on in the water, and what happens with the control systems in between those two. Let's start with the wind. So let's talk basics. The boat's fuel is the wind. The air is moving relative to the water, and that has a mass. Any mass which is moving has stored kinetic energy. To extract or convert that kinetic energy, the F50 has to deflect the wind. And every action has an opposite and equal reaction which propels the yacht. But critically, the yacht has to physically interact with that volume of air to extract any power from it. Okay, now to break down the big misconception. I hear it said often that fast planing dinghies and foiling craft create their own wind as they sail around, and that's why they are so fast. Whilst it is true that when moving you feel an element of apparent wind similar to what you would feel, in a moving car sticking your head out the window, but it's not true that the boats are creating their own energy from this. In fact, apparent wind only slows them down with more drag. The real reason that fast boats seem to unlock this extra power is that by moving around and moving quickly, they can have their sails interact with a greater volume of air. And the more air they interact with, the greater amount of fuel they have. And now we're starting to get close to why this first leg is so difficult. Just imagine you're in a race car where you have to chase fuel around the track. And what's more, the octane of that fuel, which in our case is wind speed, is invisible and constantly changing. So the crews are continually looking for clues as to the quality of the fuel in the world around them, whether that's ripples on the water, leaves on a tree, or a boat ahead of them. And there's no accelerator on these boats. The faster they go, the greater volume of air they interact with, and therefore fuel they have, which is fed into their engine. Just imagine a situation with an F1 car where the throttle opens wider and wider the faster you get on the straight. And all these crew can truly do is just tune the engine to make best of that fuel flow. And here it is. On the sprint leg, the crews are in this positive feedback loop. They get a gust, an injection of higher octane fuel to the engine, accelerating the boat, which, as speed increases, allows them to interact with a greater volume of air, opening the throttle, adding yet more power in this runaway cycle. Why is this such a problem for these boats? Well, let's go back to the beginner. In a displacement boat, their speed is restricted by the bow wave. So this acceleration is pretty muted. All they really have to deal with is the gust alone. Add on to this, sailing on a reach, you have a nice wide power zone sailing across the wind where whichever way you steer, the boat stays powered up. And this is what makes this point of sail ideal for beginners. But in an F50, trouble. Now, even for planing dinghies which break free of displacement and accelerate skimming along the water, it is pretty difficult to contain this feedback loop. But in an F50 which is flying on foils, the lack of drag allows rapid acceleration and sudden uncontrollable injections of high octane fuel. Now, upwind and downwind, the boats are operating on the edge of this power. So if they get in this feedback loop and get into trouble, they can make very fine adjustments to break the chain. But on the power reach, whichever way they turn, the power remains. There is a reason that high performance sailors call this the death zone. But the boats don't accelerate forever. Speed potential is finite. And here we need to talk about what's going on in the water. Now, unfortunately, the off-ramps that de-escalate the power build cycle aren't exactly fantastic either. Firstly is a cavitation barrier, where at around 50 knots, pressure on the low side of the foil becomes so low the water begins to boil and turn to gas. Tiny explosions where the fluid is literally being torn apart. This kills efficiency of the foil and can be quite abrupt in its effects. However, on the sprint leg, it's mostly a second thing, righting moment. All this runaway power in the boat sails should start to tip it over. The majority of other boats balance this with mass and gravity, whether that's a keel, a person hanging over the side, or the weight of the whole platform of the boat itself. The F50 though augments weight and mass with a downforce from its windward rudder. As the boat powers up, the rudder begins to stall and let go, and this can induce cavitation itself, and the lift is pushed to its max with a full stall of the rudder, leaving the water, the boat going bows down, and the whole F50 heels over. Now, upwind and downwind, the helms can make micro adjustments to the steering of the F50 to take it out of the power zone. But on this sprint leg, the power zone is so wide that it can become kind of confusing and disorientating as to which way to turn to de-escalate the situation. And, even if you do pick the right adjustment, the zone is so wide you often need a big change or a big trim to the course to make any difference to the power. Lastly, we have control functions. The forces involved here are huge, and we've already seen 2 examples of what can happen when the power cycle runs away from itself. They actually occurred within moments of each other in Sassanids. So first of all, rudders can stall, start to wobble, and just eject from the boat, and end up in a pitch pole. Or another thing that can happen with the main foils with the wrong lift differential, they can actually tear the platform apart, like what happened to the Brazilians. To combat those 2 situations, SailGP have put limits on the control. Now, we understand this to be a limit of the rake of the main foil as well as, and in combination with, a limit on the differential between the 2 rudders, and that obviously limits to an extent your righting moment. The result of those limits is the yacht won't tear itself apart, but it will stop behaving how the crew are asking it to behave, and that often results in a splashdown, as we saw with Italy and the New Zealands. Now, a relatively tame splashdown still means a pretty sudden and unpredictable loss of speed, and that isn't a great thing to be happening in proximity to other boats. So what conclusions do we take from this? Well, hopefully what I've said here has shone a bit of a light on the challenges of SailGP's opening sprint leg, and I haven't touched on the fact that it's a crowded course. From my perspective, we absolutely should be talking about split fleets and other kind of risk barriers like PPE and, the Halo style crew protectors. But, maybe we should consider changing the course format. Does the sprint leg need to be a death zone reach? Could we actually keep the fleet sizes as they are and just move to a tighter reach when the wind's up to allow better control of that power? I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I'd also like to know if this video's kind of changed your perceptions of how these boats work or the challenges on that first leg. Right, going forward and moving away from SailGP, I am finally hearing whispers of AC75 boat launches, and as soon as they splash, you'll be hearing extra from myself and Freddie. I'm particularly looking at bouncing some of my theories off his actual inside knowledge. So TheFoil is only just getting started for 2026. So make sure you subscribe to tag along. Take care. I'll see you around.